With just 3 days to go until I'm riding this bike from here in Essex down to London and on to Paris, we're back in the garage today as I finally get around to replacing the faulty left shifter and generally giving her a good old tune-up, so that hopefully the only part of the bike that could go wrong on the day is the part riding it. So I'm going to be stripping the bike down and effectively rebuilding it from scratch, as I'm going to be giving the frame a much needed deep clean, replacing all the brake and shift cables, installing a new crank and adding new bar tape once the new shifter has been replaced. So quite a large job list to get through then. So let's crack straight on with getting the wheels off, and then I'm going to start with the cables. Oh, and one other job I've just been reminded of as I take the through axles out, and that is that I will need to replace the through axles, or at least the retaining nut, because when I had a puncture on this bike last week and I tried to take this retaining nut out, the hex head hole in the top of it has rounded over somewhat. So the last thing I want is to be stuck on the Avenue Vert in the middle of northern France with no way of getting my rear or front through axles out. So I do have some spare through axles that I bought a little while ago, so they're also going to be getting changed today. Now, when stripping the shift cables out of a semi-internally routed frame like this, you can't just pull them out and slide the new ones in, because the cable housings don't go all the way through the frame. The brake housings do travel all the way down though, as otherwise you'd be using the structural integrity of the bike itself to transfer that braking force to the calipers. Because the shift cables don't use such high tension forces to pull the derailleurs though, those cables can and do travel naked through the frame. And only when they re-emerge at the back and near the front derailleur do you need to start putting cable housings on again. So if you just pull the cable out, you're then going to have a massive headache of trying to feed the cable through the frame and back out of the exit ports, which, let me tell you, is a massive pain in the backside. So what you do need first is to feed these cable routing guides along the cable, and once that's in place you can pull the cables out, but make sure you do add a little piece of tape either end of the routing guide so it doesn't just accidentally get pulled out as you're working on the bike. Okay, so I'm having a bit of a problem because one of the single strands on the cable, on the shift cable for the rear derailleur, has come unwound, and it doesn't want to let the cable routing guide slip over it because it just keeps digging into the side. So what I'm going to have to do now is take some trusty electrical insulation tape, tape the cable routing guide to the end of the cable, and just hope that I'm able to then pull the whole thing through without causing any problems and without the cable coming out of the cable routing guide. I have a horrible feeling this could go wrong, but we're going to have to give it a go because I literally have no other options. But before I do that, actually, I'm going to take the front derailleur cable off and feed that out, because both the front and rear derailleur cables route through a rubber guide underneath the bottom bracket here, and if that cable is loose, then I can pull that rubber guide out when I loosen this cable a little bit, and that should reduce the tension needed to pull that cable routing guide through. So let's take the front derailleur off first, and then we can start dealing with the rear derailleur cable. Okay, so the inevitable happened there, and as I was pulling that rubberized cable routing channel underneath the bottom bracket out, it pulled this cable through and pulled it out of the cable routing guide, this plastic one. However, I eventually managed to feed it back through this way and back out of the rear exit port. So we are back and good to go. So now I can continue running the plastic routing guides. But just be aware, this job can be an absolute nightmare, so it's not going to take 5 minutes, and if you're doing a similar thing, schedule a good hour, if not longer, to get this job done. Right, well that is finally the cable routing guides through, and that is fast becoming my least favourite job behind doing the bar tape, but at least they're now in. I don't have much to play with here, but as I say, if you put those little tabs on with a little bit of insulation tape or some masking tape, then it should at least stop them pulling back through the frame. So that's done, and now I can actually start pulling the cables out. Right, so now that's finally all of the cables stripped out of the bike. So now I'm going to strip the rest of the group set off and give it a good clean and a degrease, ready for it to go back on a bit later on. Right, so now we pretty much just have a naked bike. I'm going to remove the fork to give the whole frame a good clean up and replace the headset bearings. Now, I don't think there's anything actually wrong with the bearings that are in there currently, because the steering still feels nice and smooth, but I'm going to change them out anyway. And if the current bearings do seem in pretty good working order still, then I'll just give them a good clean up, degrease and re-grease, and put them in the spare parts bin for use later. Now, one of the problems I have is that because this handlebar is partially internally routed, and because the brake and shift cable housings were an absolute nightmare to push through this handlebar in the first place, I've absolutely no intention of removing them completely. So I'll just have to let the bars hang gently in front of the bike here while I remove the fork. That does mean that I'll need to loosen the front brake caliper too to allow the fork to fall out. So I will need to realign that later when the wheel is back on and the disc is back in place. But right now I'm going to get the bars off and take the fork out. Right, so despite the lower headset bearing actually still being really smooth, there is a hell of a lot of dirt and crap all over it. So definitely a good idea to change it out anyway. And looking into the top of the headset there, it looks like the top bearing is the same. I'm actually quite surprised, as I say, that is still very smooth, but always best to change them out, and I can always clean this one up and use it later on if needs be. Yeah, similarly for the headset bearing, as I say, now I've taken it out, that feels even smoother than the bottom one, but again, we will change it. Okay, so that is the bearings done now, and that's feeling nice and smooth. So now just to deal with this dodgy left shifter. And as I've mentioned far too many times in previous videos, this left shifter just stopped working a little while back. I initially thought it was the derailleur that was seized, but it turns out it's actually the shifter itself which isn't engaging fully and therefore isn't pulling the cable. So as I've no idea how to actually fix that at the moment, I've just gone out and bought a second-hand Shimano 105 shifter from eBay to replace it. Now, that does mean that I'll have two of these 40 shifters now, as I ended up with another broken one when I was buying the parts for the gravel bike I put together for my son. So I will sit down to try and figure out what's wrong with this one and the other one from my son's gravel bike at some point, either to keep them as spares or sell them and try and recoup a little bit of money from them. For now though, I'm just going to get this one off, replace it with this one, which means removing the bar tape. Now, as you may know, I absolutely detest retaping bars, but on this occasion, I can't avoid it, and quite honestly, yeah, I think it's time it was changed. This bar tape is absolutely filthy and it's been bodged and fixed a number of times. So I'm going to take the bar tape off first and then set about removing that 40 shifter. Okay, so that's finally all of the old bar tape off, but before I take the shifter off, I'm just going to mark up the upper and lower parts of the clamp on the back of the shifter, just so I know when I'm putting the new one on exactly where it should sit, so it then sits level with the other shifter. And I find the best way to do this is to just use a simple pencil, because against carbon fibre, if you use a pen, it's not necessarily going to mark properly. A marker doesn't always show up, but a graphite pencil will show up a definite line on the carbon, and it will let you know exactly where to put the new shifter when it goes back on. Right, so that is the new shifter on, cable housings seated in and the shifter itself fully tightened up. Now I'm going to leave the bar tape until the end because, as you might be able to see, this bike has got quite a bit of grub on it because I haven't washed it since its last ride, and it's especially dirty in places that you can't really get to, like behind the cranks and in between the chain and seat stays here. So I'm going to head off and give this thing a proper deep clean, as well as the front and rear derailleur that I've taken off and a few of the other components that need cleaning up. So I'm going to do that and I will be back very shortly. Right, okay, we are back with a beautiful clean frame, loads of clean and newly lubed parts. So I think it's time to start building this thing back up again, and I'm going to start with the bottom bracket and the rest of the group set. However, instead of putting this AliExpress special Z-Race crank back on, I'm actually replacing it with a Shimano 105 crank of the same size, so a 50-34 tooth setup that I managed to get 3 of these for about 50 quid from the John Pye website recently. So I thought I might as well finally match up the entire group set and keep it all 105. So let's get all this back on the bike. That is most of the group set back on, but I'm not reinstalling the old chain as it did have a couple of thousand miles on it. It had started to stretch a little, so I'll be replacing that with a new one, but I need to strip the new chain completely of all the oil first and then dip it in hot wax, so I'm going to leave that until later. So now I'm going to start feeding the new cables back through and then start getting everything terminated. Right, well that is pretty much everything done except the chain, and unfortunately I can't put it off any longer. It's time to do the bar tape, and as ever I'm going to be using Calvin Jones from Park Tools method of running electrical insulation tape inside out effectively, so the sticky side is out, which really helps to stick the bar tape to the bars, and if it ever gets cut or if I drop the bike and part of it gets ripped, it just stops the bar tape unraveling. So let's get on with this. Okay, so that is the bar tape done. I have put the pedals back on from the old crank and I have put on the newly freshly waxed chain. Now, the first time you wax a chain, it can be a little bit involved with stripping all the old grease off, and there's a few bits and pieces that you'll need to buy as well. So I've decided to save that for another video, otherwise I would have shown you that, but it can be a little bit involved and probably going away from basically what this video is about. But otherwise, here we have a fully stripped down, cleaned, re-greased and rebuilt bike. But what do you think? As good as the day it rolled off the production line? Well, probably not, because this was originally a matte black frame, and over time, yeah, the paint has worn a little bit and it's now got more of a glossy feel to it. But this is not a piece of art, it is a tool, and so it's designed to be used, and therefore it's going to have a few war wounds. But I am very happy with how it looks now though, and hopefully it will easily carry me the 220 odd miles from here to Paris this Friday, and that video will also be coming soon. So if you'd like to watch that and you're not already subscribed, then I would love it if you could hit that subscribe button below and maybe even like and leave a comment on this video, as that really helps the channel spread and grow. So with all that said, I am going to head out to give this thing a test ride just to make sure that everything's done up tight, ready to roll, and I'm not going to have any major problems Friday morning with anything falling off. So I hope you found this video useful and interesting, and thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.